The steel-gray corridors of the medical space station Prometheus were sterile and silent, save for the soft hum of artificial gravity stabilizers. Lieutenant Connor Hensley stepped cautiously, his boots echoing against the pristine floors. The sharp tang of antiseptic lingered in the air, an unwelcome reminder of why he was here. His olive-green uniform clung uncomfortably to his frame, sweat gathering under the collar despite the regulated temperature. Connor's eyes, a stormy mix of blue and gray, scanned the signage above the doors. Each labeled chamber seemed colder than the last: quarantine ward, experimental lab, intergalactic medical exchange. He felt his pulse quicken as he approached the final door, alien medical wing. He had been warned. The station's advanced treatments were unorthodox, designed by minds far beyond human comprehension. But after weeks of agonizing illness, the kind Earth doctors had failed to cure, he was desperate. A shadow of the man he once was, his once broad shoulders now hunched with fatigue, Connor clung to a flicker of hope, the alien doctor everyone whispered about. The door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the room was both mesmerizing and disconcerting. The walls pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins, casting the chamber in a soft blue glow. Shelves lined with vials of iridescent liquids glinted like jewels under the light. Strange, organic devices hung suspended in midair, defying gravity. At the center stood Dr. Ilaria, a vision of otherworldly grace. She was taller than Connor, her willowy frame encased in a translucent gown that shimmered with shifting hues. Her skin, pale with a faint lavender sheen, seemed to absorb the light around her. Twin ridges arched delicately over her silver eyes, which held no pupils, only endless, reflective pools. Her hair, if it could be called that, flowed like liquid silver, cascading down her back. When she turned to face him, Connor felt an involuntary hitch in his breath. "You are unwell," Ilaria said, her voice a melodic cadence that seemed to bypass his ears and echo directly in his mind. Her gaze swept over him, unblinking and unnervingly precise. "Sit." Connor obeyed, lowering himself onto a curved, organic chair that seemed to mold itself to his form. He struggled to find words. I've been told you can help." Her head tilted slightly, an avian gesture that conveyed both curiosity and quiet authority. "Your body is failing. Standard medicine cannot heal you." "I can." Her voice softened, yet carried a weight of certainty. "But you must trust me." Connor hesitated. Every instinct screamed to question, to demand details. But the relentless pain in his chest silenced those thoughts. What do I have to do?" Ilaria approached, her movements fluid and unnaturally quiet. From a nearby shelf, she retrieved a vial containing a viscous, milky substance. It glowed faintly, the light pulsating in time with her movements. "This will heal you," she said, her fingers brushing the vial's surface with a tenderness that seemed almost reverent. "What is it?" Connor asked, his voice cracking. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the liquid. "A serum unique to my physiology. My body produces it naturally, but only under specific conditions." Her gaze locked onto his, and for the first time, a flicker of emotion, something like apprehension, crossed her ethereal features. "You must close your eyes to receive it. It is the only way." The room seemed to shrink around him, the air thick with tension. Connor's mind raced, 1,000 questions bubbling to the surface. Yet Illyria's expression remained impassive, her silver eyes reflecting his own gaunt form. "What happens if I don't?" he whispered. "You will die," she said simply. The starkness of her words left no room for doubt. Connor swallowed hard, his throat dry. His fingers clenched the edge of the chair, knuckles white. He nodded. "Do it." Illyria leaned closer, her movements unhurried but deliberate. The faintest trace of an unfamiliar scent, something floral and metallic, filled the air. "Close your eyes," she instructed, her voice softer now, almost coaxing. Connor obeyed, his world plunging into darkness. The first touch startled him, a cool, silken sensation against his forehead. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was unlike anything he had ever felt. A tingling warmth spread through his skin, down his neck, and into his chest. His breathing hitched as the warmth deepened, seeping into his very core. "Do not open your eyes," Illyria's voice murmured, as if from a great distance. Connor's muscles tensed as the sensation grew, an intense, almost unbearable pressure blooming in his chest. He wanted to scream, to demand what she was doing to him, but his voice failed him. Then, just as abruptly, the pressure released, replaced by a surge of vitality so overwhelming it brought tears to his eyes. When he finally opened them, Illyria was standing several feet away, her gaze unreadable. The vial was empty in her hand. Connor's trembling fingers reached for his chest, where the ache had vanished. His skin glowed faintly, a soft luminescence fading even as he watched. What did you do to me?" he gasped. Illyria's expression remained impassive. "You are healed," she said, but her tone carried an undercurrent of something else, something that made Connor's stomach churn with unease. As he rose unsteadily to his feet, he realized he felt stronger than he had in months. But the air between them crackled with an unspoken tension, as if the procedure had awakened something neither of them fully understood. The sterile air of the medical bay hung heavy, a stark contrast to the swirling storm of emotions within Dr. Illyria Vela. She stood motionless beside the gleaming diagnostic table where Lieutenant Connor Hayes sat, his gaze pinned to the floor. His usually upright posture was now slouched, betraying the exhaustion that had seeped into his bones. Illyria's slender fingers, pale as the light that filtered through the translucent walls, tightened around the edge of the table. Her composure remained intact, but her mind churned like a restless ocean. Why did he hesitate? The question echoed relentlessly in her thoughts. Trust was a fragile thing, and his resistance earlier had cracked it in ways she hadn't anticipated. Connor finally broke the silence, his voice low and gravelly. "I didn't mean to offend you, Doctor." He looked up, his steel-gray eyes meeting her luminous emerald gaze. The intensity in her eyes made him falter, the weight of her unspoken thoughts pressing down on him. "I do not require apologies, Lieutenant," Illyria replied, her tone clipped yet musical. "What I require is cooperation. Without it, you jeopardize not only your own recovery but the mission as well." Her words carried a sharp edge, but beneath them lay something softer, an undercurrent of worry she couldn't quite suppress. Connor picked up on it, his instincts honed by years of navigating tense negotiations in the field. "I just need time," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "This treatment, it's not exactly easy to process." Illyria's expression softened, though only slightly. She stepped closer, her movements fluid, almost feline. The faint scent of something floral, alien, unfamiliar, reached Connor as she leaned in to inspect the medical interface embedded in the wall. The holographic screen flickered to life, displaying his vital signs and a three-dimensional model of his body, annotated with markers highlighting areas of concern. "This is not about ease, Lieutenant," she said, her voice quieter now, more personal. "It is about survival. Your species is fragile in ways mine is not. You have fractures, physical and otherwise, that require immediate intervention." Connor winced at her choice of words. "Physical and otherwise? What's that supposed to mean?" Illyria turned to face him fully, her delicate features illuminated by the glow of the holographic display. Her eyes, with their faintly luminescent irises, studied him with a precision that made him feel utterly exposed. "It means you are fractured, Lieutenant," she said, her words deliberate. "Your body shows signs of strain, malnourishment, dehydration, and injuries not properly treated. And yet you resist the very methods that could heal you." He opened his mouth to respond but closed it again, unsure of what to say. She was right, of course. Months of grueling missions on inhospitable planets had left him battered in ways he hadn't fully acknowledged. But there was something about her, about the way her solution required such vulnerability, that set his nerves on edge. Illyria sighed, a sound so faint it was almost imperceptible. She reached out, her hand hovering just above his shoulder before withdrawing. "I understand your hesitation," she said. "But if you continue to resist, the consequences will be severe." Connor's jaw tightened. "You keep saying that, But you haven't explained why. What's so special about your treatment? Her gaze flickered, a shadow of uncertainty crossing her face before she masked it. It is not something I can fully explain, she admitted. It is biological. Unique to my kind. The nutrients you require are not easily synthesized in your medical systems, but they are present in my physiology. Connor's eyes widened slightly, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to click into place. Wait, are you saying? Yes, Elara interrupted, her tone firm. The milk my body produces contains the necessary compounds to stabilize your condition. It is the most efficient solution available. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling heavily between them. Connor felt a flush of heat rise to his face, a mix of embarrassment, disbelief, and something he couldn't quite name. He glanced away, his hands clenching into fists. This is insane, he muttered. You're asking me to. I am not asking, Elara interjected, her voice rising slightly, the sharpness returning. I am telling you what must be done. Your pride, your discomfort, they are irrelevant in the face of necessity. Her words stung, but they also stirred something in him, an understanding of the stakes, of the precarious balance they were trying to maintain. He took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling as he tried to steady himself. Fine, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I'll do it. Elara's expression softened again, a hint of relief flickering across her face. She nodded and stepped back, giving him space. Lie down, she instructed, her tone more clinical now. Close your eyes. Connor hesitated for a moment before complying, lowering himself onto the diagnostic table. The surface was cool against his skin, a stark contrast to the heat radiating from his body. He closed his eyes, his mind racing with questions and doubts. He heard the soft rustle of fabric as Elara prepared, followed by the faint hum of the medical equipment. The tension in the room was palpable, each second stretching into an eternity. And then, he felt it, a warmth, soft and unexpected, followed by a sensation that defied description. It was unlike anything he had ever experienced, a strange blend of comfort and unease. The world around him seemed to fade, leaving only the sensation and the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat. Elara watched him closely, her own emotions a tumultuous mix of duty and something she couldn't quite name. She had done this before countless times, but never with a human. Never with someone who looked at her with such conflicted intensity. As the treatment progressed, Connor's breathing slowed, his body relaxing despite his initial resistance. Elara allowed herself a small, fleeting smile. Perhaps there was hope for him after all. But the moment of calm was short-lived. The medical bay's lights flickered, a sudden jolt of energy coursing through the ship. Elara's head snapped toward the door, her senses on high alert. What was that? Connor asked, his voice groggy but laced with concern. Elara didn't answer immediately. She stepped toward the control panel, her fingers dancing over the holographic interface. A frown creased her brow as she scanned the data. An external disturbance, she said finally. Something, or someone, has boarded the ship. Connor sat up abruptly, his earlier discomfort forgotten. What do you mean boarded? Are we under attack? Elara's gaze met his, her expression unreadable. I do not know, she said. But we must be prepared for anything. As the ship's alarm system blared to life, the fragile trust they had begun to build was put to the test. And in the shadowy corridors beyond the medical bay, something sinister stirred. The ship's alarm pierced the medical bay, its shrill wail a jarring contrast to the quiet intensity that had settled between Dr. Elara Vela and Lieutenant Connor Hayes moments before. Connor swung his legs off the diagnostic table, his mind already racing with possibilities. What kind of disturbance? He demanded, his voice steady despite the unease creeping into his chest. Elara's fingers danced over the holographic interface, the screen casting ghostly light across her sharp features. Energy fluctuations, she murmured, her brow furrowing. Localized in the cargo bay. But they don't match any known patterns. Could it be pirates? Connor asked, already reaching for his sidearm, a weapon he hadn't used in weeks but kept within arm's reach out of habit. Unlikely, Elara replied, though her tone held no certainty. Pirates wouldn't use such subtle methods. This is something else. The ship shuddered, a low vibration rippling through its metal frame. Connor shot to his feet, his instincts honed by years of combat taking over. He moved toward the door, but Elara stepped in his path, her lithe form blocking his way. Where are you going? She asked sharply. To check it out, Connor said, his jaw tightening. If something's on this ship, we can't just sit here waiting for it to find us. Elara's eyes narrowed, her luminescent irises flickering like distant stars. Your condition is unstable, Lieutenant. You're in no position to engage with an unknown threat. My condition can wait, he snapped. I'm not about to let whatever's out there take us by surprise. For a moment, their gazes locked, the tension between them crackling like a live wire. Elara's mind raced, weighing the risks. He was stubborn, reckless even, but there was a fire in him, a determination that mirrored her own. Fine, she said finally, stepping aside. But you're not going alone. Connor hesitated, surprised by her sudden agreement. You're coming with me? I am, Elara said, her tone leaving no room for argument. If this threat is biological or technological, you'll need me to analyze it. Besides, she added, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips, someone has to keep you alive. Connor couldn't suppress a small chuckle, though the gravity of the situation quickly returned. Fair enough. Let's move. They left the medical bay together, the corridors of the ship bathed in a pulsing red light. The alarm continued its relentless wail, each note a reminder of the danger lurking just out of sight. As they approached the cargo bay, the air seemed to grow heavier, the silence between them thick with unspoken tension. Connor gripped his sidearm tightly, his knuckles white against the matte black metal. Elara, he said quietly, glancing at her. Do you have any idea what we're dealing with? She shook her head, her expression unreadable. No. But whatever it is, it's sophisticated. The energy fluctuations are too precise to be random. They reached the cargo bay doors, which loomed before them like the maw of some great beast. Connor took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. Stay behind me, he said, his voice firm. Elara raised an elegant eyebrow but didn't argue. She stepped to the side, her fingers poised over the control panel. With a single command, the doors slid open, revealing the cavernous space beyond. The cargo bay was dark, save for the faint glow of emergency lights casting eerie shadows across the walls. Crates and containers were scattered haphazardly, as though something, or someone, had been searching for something. Connor moved forward cautiously, his weapon raised. His boots made barely a sound against the metal floor, but the silence around them felt deafening. Elara, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Do you see anything? She scanned the room, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Her senses, more attuned than his, picked up faint traces of something, an energy signature that was both familiar and alien. There, she said, pointing toward a cluster of crates near the back of the bay. Connor followed her gaze, his grip tightening on his weapon. As they approached, the air grew colder, a chill seeping into their skin. And then they saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, its form shrouded in a flickering haze of light. It was humanoid, but its movements were unnatural, jerky and disjointed, as though it were struggling to maintain its shape. Connor's breath caught in his throat. What the hell is that? Elara stepped closer, her curiosity outweighing her fear. It's not a life form, she said, her voice tinged with wonder. It's a projection. An energy construct. The figure turned toward them, its featureless face somehow conveying a sense of intent. It raised an arm, and a pulse of energy shot toward them, crackling with raw power. Move! Connor shouted, pulling Elara behind a stack of crates just as the energy blast scorched the floor where they had been standing. His heart raced as he peered around the edge of the crate, his mind scrambling for a plan. Can you shut it down? He asked, glancing at Elara. She nodded, her expression grim. I'll need to access the ship's systems. Keep it distracted. Connor didn't like the sound of that, but there was no time to argue. Go, he said, stepping out from behind the crate. The construct turned toward him, its movements fluid yet otherworldly. Connor fired his weapon, the sharp crack of the shots echoing through the cargo bay. The energy rounds struck the construct, but they dissipated on impact, leaving it unharmed. Of course, Connor muttered under his breath. Nothing's ever easy. Meanwhile, Elara worked frantically at the control panel, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The ship's systems resisted her attempts to override them, the foreign energy signature interfering with the controls. Connor, she called out, her voice strained. I need more time. He didn't respond, too focused on keeping the construct's attention. It advanced toward him, each step radiating a palpable sense of menace. Elara, he shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. Whatever you're doing, do it faster! I'm trying, she snapped, sweat beading on her forehead. Just hold on. The construct raised its arm again, another pulse of energy crackling to life. Connor braced himself, knowing he wouldn't be able to dodge this one. But just as the blast was about to hit, the construct faltered, its form flickering like a dying flame. Elara let out a triumphant cry as she finally bypassed the interference, redirecting the ship's energy systems to disrupt the construct's signal. The figure wavered, its form dissolving into a cascade of light. Within seconds it was gone, leaving only silence in its wake. Connor lowered his weapon, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He turned to Elara, who was leaning heavily against the control panel, her face pale but determined. What the hell was that thing? He asked, his voice hoarse. Elara shook her head, her expression troubled. I don't know, she said. But whatever it wasn't here by accident. Connor frowned, the weight of her words sinking in. You think it was sent? Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And whoever sent it, they know we're here. The ship shuddered again, a distant rumble echoing through its halls. Connor and Elara exchanged a look, the fragile alliance between them solidifying in the face of a new, unknown enemy. The ship's tremors deepened, each quake more violent than the last. Connor braced himself against the corridor wall as Elara stumbled beside him. Somewhere above them, the distant groan of overstressed metal hinted at the ship's structural integrity nearing its limit. We can't stay here, Connor said, his voice strained over the rumble. That thing wasn't just a random probe, it was a scout. Whatever's coming next is bigger. Elara nodded, her usually composed demeanor now tinged with urgency. We need to reach the command deck. If I can access the ship's full systems, I might be able to track the origin of the signal. And stop whatever sent it? Connor asked, already moving down the corridor. That depends on what we find, she replied, falling into step behind him. They moved quickly, their footsteps echoing through the dimly lit halls. The emergency lights flickered, casting jagged shadows that seemed to lunge at them as they passed. Connor's grip on his sidearm tightened, his every muscle coiled with anticipation. When they reached the command deck, the doors resisted at first, but Elara's quick hands overrode the controls. The doors hissed open to reveal the sprawling bridge, its expansive viewports framing the black void of space. But something was wrong. The air in the room felt heavier, charged with an almost imperceptible hum that made Connor's skin crawl. At the center of the bridge, a shimmering field of light pulsed rhythmically, a sphere of energy, its surface rippling like liquid fire. Elara froze, her eyes widening in recognition. You've seen this before, Connor said, stepping forward cautiously. I've read about it, she murmured, her voice barely audible. It's a neurobreach node, a gateway of sorts. It's transmitting, but also drawing something in. Drawing what in? Connor demanded, his voice rising with frustration. Before Elara could answer, the sphere flared, and a figure began to emerge. Unlike the construct in the cargo bay, this one was solid, its form tall and sinewy, with jagged, translucent armor that refracted light into a kaleidoscope of colors. Its face was a mask of angular features, devoid of anything resembling humanity. Connor raised his weapon, but Alara grabbed his arm. "Don't!" she hissed. "It's not fully materialized yet. Attacking it now could destabilize the gateway, and us with it." "Then what do you suggest?" he shot back, his tone biting. Alara didn't answer. Instead, she approached the console at the center of the room, her fingers moving faster than Connor had ever seen. Data streams filled the holographic display, the alien language flashing too quickly for him to comprehend. "Alara," he pressed, his voice tight with urgency. "Talk to me." "It's linked to the ship's neural network," she said, her tone clipped. "This isn't just a random incursion, it's a hijacking. If I don't sever the connection, it'll take control of the entire vessel. And if it does, then we're dead. Or worse." Connor didn't ask what worse meant. He could see the answer in her eyes. The figure within the gateway began to solidify, its movements slow and deliberate. It tilted its head as though observing them, its alien intelligence palpable even without words. "Alara," Connor said, his voice low. "It's watching us." "I know," she replied, her focus unbroken. "Just keep it distracted a little longer." Connor stepped forward, his weapon still trained on the figure. "Hey!" he barked, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I don't know what you are, but you picked the wrong ship to mess with." The figure didn't respond, but its head turned slightly, its faceless gaze locking onto Connor. The air around him grew colder, and a strange pressure built in his chest, as though the very presence of the entity was pressing down on him. "Alara, whatever you're doing, do it faster," he said through gritted teeth. The alien entity raised an arm, and a tendril of light shot toward Connor. He dove to the side, narrowly avoiding the searing energy as it struck the wall behind him, leaving a scorched, smoking gash in the metal. "Alara!" he shouted, his voice ragged. "Almost there!" she snapped, her fingers a blur over the console. Sweat dripped down her temples, her usually calm demeanor now fractured by the sheer intensity of her efforts. The alien advanced, its movements fluid and deliberate. Connor fired his weapon, but the energy rounds dissolved against the creature's translucent armor, as though they were nothing more than harmless sparks. "Alara, we're out of time!" he yelled, desperation lacing his voice. "Done!" she cried, slamming her hand down on the console. The sphere of energy shuddered violently, its surface rippling like a storm-tossed sea. The alien entity froze, its form flickering as the gateway began to collapse. Connor grabbed Alara, pulling her back as the energy field imploded with a deafening roar. The shockwave knocked them off their feet, the light blinding them as it engulfed the room. When the light faded, the alien entity was gone. The gateway had vanished, leaving only silence and the faint smell of ozone in its wake. Connor lay on the floor, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath. He turned to Alara, who was slumped against the console, her face pale but alive. "Did we stop it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "For now," she said, her tone heavy with exhaustion. "But this wasn't an isolated event. Whoever sent that thing, they'll try again." Connor sat up, his mind racing. "Then we need to figure out who they are, and how to stop them for good." Alara met his gaze, her luminous eyes filled with resolve. "Agreed. But if we're going to survive this, we'll need to work together. No more secrets." Connor hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. He nodded slowly, the fragile trust between them solidifying into something stronger. The ship shuddered one last time, its systems stabilizing as the threat faded into the void. But both Connor and Alara knew this was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, in the infinite expanse of space, an enemy was watching, waiting for its next move. And they would be ready.